Okay.
Hey everybody, it's Will McGee here, and I'm really excited about today. I've got Erin Varnado from CareerBuilder, who is not only like a close personal friend, but she's also a family friend of mine. She brought up some really good points in one of our last calls regarding some of the CareerBuilder tools, as well as the data behind what's going on in the market, and I just had to have her on. So I'll let Erin go ahead and go into an intro. Please introduce yourself to the crew.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. Hi, I'm Erin Varnado. I actually have been at CareerBuilder now since September. Prior to that, I spent 17 years in the staffing industry, so I'm very familiar with the desk level. I went from a recruiter to an account manager, national account manager, and then into enterprise sales. So definitely understand the whole breadth of it. Most of my career is spent in IT staffing, so definitely know that world a lot. CareerBuilder, we have a ton of different products. I think the crazy thing is when I got here, I thought initially, oh, it's a job board. Really, it's more of a data company. So we have data upon data specifically around candidates, how they interact with each other, how they want to interact with jobs, how they want to search for jobs, all of those different pieces overall kind of really make that difference as to how are you attracting them and why do they want to come work for you versus someone else. So.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this this podcast or webinar, whatever we want to call it in the future. But the reason why is because I'm a big believer in the data. I think data is going to be the biggest factor on how we approach recruiting in the future. And it's not just about AI necessarily looking to find a candidate, but really just about, like, I think we're going to go into this, some of the predictive analytics pieces to where our companies and clients and our hiring managers, if you're an internal recruiter, how you are preparing yourself to make sure that you're in a position of strength versus trying to scramble to find the candidates at the right time. You'll know, right? Like, I think a lot of that's going to be a really big factor here. So before we go into this, I'd love to get your perspective, because you're talking to staffing agencies on a daily, right? And you're hearing a lot of the pains and the frustrations and some of the things that are happening, as a small independent recruiting agency like ourselves. Like, what can you tell us that you're starting to see as far as an overview of the market? What's going on?
I think the interesting thing is, right, it just really depends on where you're located, the skill sets you're focusing on, as to what is changing. I mean, we've been seeing overall different pieces of, different skill sets kind of going up. Other states have different things skyrocketing, obviously warehouse, healthcare, things like that. But specifically within IT, we are still seeing, let me pop over here. Of course, I lost it. We're still seeing, computer and software engineering still kind of really still being there. Isn't really not kind of changing anything.
Yeah, you had mentioned that there's a lot of opportunities that are opening up in that way. Oh, here we go. And she's sharing the screen for you guys.
So what we kind of are seeing, so this was kind of overall for all of Q1, but you can kind of see this computer systems engineers and architects line. It's still going up quarter over quarter. I mean, obviously civil engineers jumped the most, but you're definitely still seeing a rise with, through Q1, which obviously is the end of March, but he definitely still saw that moving forward versus going down.
Yeah.
And I think just within IT, it just really depends on kind of overall, what are your skill sets, right? I mean, obviously project managers, you kind of know from a project manager standpoint that things have slowed down. Just more, obviously, companies aren't going to be kicking off a project right now. It's a little bit from that perspective, but you also know if you're a cloud architect, that cloud architects are going to stay relatively stable. So
in fact, probably like a boost in that side too, right?
Pardon?
Probably a boost on that aspect of things on the cloud side,
Yeah, so I think it's more of figuring out kind of which specific skill set is it affected, and then also just which type of market. We're even seeing an SIA actually put out a bunch of different data around kind of all of the different dynamics of the industries that they're seeing have been hit versus haven't been hit. So I think just kind of all of those standpoints, and I'm just going into those really quickly, but obviously who hasn't really seen a huge thing is like the pharma, biotech, and medical device, right? Like they're staying relatively stable versus utilities. They're kind of more in that, middle ground. They're not negative. They're not super negative. They're not super positive. They're just kind of holding a little steady. So I think you just have to kind of look at it from things in that perspective of what industry is your company in, what industries are you servicing, and then trying to find, how effective is that industry going to be.
Yeah, and that kind of comes down to really having a pulse on the market too. I mean, any recruiter understanding where their actual supply and demand comes from is
Right.
going to be a massive impact on how you move forward in this market, right? Just making sure that you're constantly aware of that, I think, is a big piece of it. Now, you had shown me something really cool that CareerBuilder actually has that
Yeah.
I was really impressed with, which is the supply and demand chart, right? There's like a massive
Yep.
understanding of what you guys can provide in that regard too, right?
Yeah, so our supply and demand portfolio. So basically, what this does is you can go in and you can search for a job title. I just did a software engineer across the US,
Mm.
and you can break it out all the way back down to 2 years, but I did it for the last 3 months. So, I mean, obviously, that we've been in a short supply, high demand market. Like
Yeah.
that's not a new thing, but it's more around now you can actually quantify some of that data.
Mm.
Um, and also you can kind of quantify around like the compensation piece of it too, and see kind of around especially the trends, right?
Mm.
When typically do you see more job postings for software engineers?
Yeah.
As you can see, obviously the trend line for active candidates doesn't ever really spike over the past 2 years, but definitely the job postings started spiking a lot in July of 2019.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Like, I have my theories on that, but why is it that July really hits the high demand if on the job posting side?
I think, I mean, July typically, I mean, surprisingly, a lot more companies from a fiscal perspective do run that, July 1 type of thing. They're not necessarily calendar. So I think there's also those pieces. But I feel like, Q3 in general is just usually a stronger time frame for if you are a calendar company. So for most companies, that's your Q3 or it's your Q1, right? Depending on your fiscal calendar. So those are just usually stronger quarters in general for people. Overall. So typically most companies, you are going to see those spikes. And that's also a way, if it is a new company that you're prospecting, that's also a good way for you to figure out when is their fiscal.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's like another part of that too, because we know that the recruiting industry, most companies aren't posting a job. By the time they've gotten to the posting side of things, it's going to be like after they've exhausted any internal resources, any referral programs or whatever it might be.
Yes.
Most of the time, right? And that's going to take 3 to 4 or 5 weeks maybe to find, the candidate internally and with their recruiting partners or whatever it might be. So at that point, I feel like you're in a situation where you've had the position open probably since March.
Right.
And now you're like, okay, we're ready to ramp this up a bit and open it up to a much general, higher, broader public. And this goes into some of the things about knowing your market, right? And knowing
Yes.
where they're coming from and knowing like your niche, right? I'm a big believer in niching out. So for all the recruiters out there that are, in this situation where you're kind of trying to figure out how to best position yourself, this supply and demand aspect of things is really important because we do think that data is going to be one of those big pieces that is going to change our industry. So and it's also really funny for any of the leaders or managers out there when they're hounding their recruiters to tell them, hey, you need to get out there, get more job orders. And it's really not as easy or it's not as straightforward as go get more job orders. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. I think that's the piece of it as well of it's the get more job orders, but also, well, how am I going to fill more job orders? Like there's all those other sides to it. Clearly Rated did their entire state of the staffing professionals study. Probably they published it in like January, February timeframe. And I think one of the interesting aspects of it was how much the NPS score had lowered specifically for recruiters versus leadership and account managers.
Could you explain what NPS is before we go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So your NPS score is basically, it's looking at the kind of your positivity, I guess is kind of the easiest way to kind of describe it. So it's the positivity score of, how are people feeling? Like, are they feeling like this is a good place? Do they want to stay? All of those different pieces. So this was kind of from them looking at it of, leadership, obviously it went up, right? Like leadership is like, yes, I love my staffing firm. I want to stay here. This is a great place to work.
Yeah.
They've gone up versus recruiters has definitely gone down. And I think that's a lot coming from the aspect of recruiters right now, especially in the market for the past couple of years, have just constantly been getting that kick in the teeth of find me a candidate, find me a candidate, find me a candidate. And, when supply is as low and demand is as high, every candidate's getting called by 5, 10, 15 other jobs. So it really starts to fall more, I think, on the account manager of you need to give your recruiters those skills and those different pieces of information that's going to set your job apart from all of these other jobs.
Yeah.
So yes, recruiters, can they find more candidates? Of course. But can account managers arm them with better information so that they can actually make that information impactful to candidates so that they can hold on to them? Yes. So both sides have to work together. And that's where I think a lot of times, there is this divide between the two when really they both should be feeling a little bit of that, kick in the teeth of find more people.
Absolutely. And like leadership's really interesting because I've been a part of firms where leadership is so removed and detached from really understanding what the recruiter's going through, especially ones that are just jumping in. And it's so easy for us to go, well, the job market's hot, right? And we should be able to, close as many deals, just get more emails out or get more phone calls out. And as a leader, you're probably seeing some of your top producers coming in and still being able to crush it. And so you're happy because you're making money and you're hitting your goals or your quota, or whatever it might be. And the account manager or the client manager, if you will, is going to be fine because they're the ones creating the relationships. But the recruiter who's actually out there trying to source and try to identify candidates and track them, they're getting the least amount of service from both sides. And I saw that, at many of the companies I've worked at. And the recruiter's always the one that kind of gets, like you said, kicked in the teeth and feels the pain the most because at the end of the day, it's such a skinny market and if you make one mistake as a recruiter, that could mean that the rest of your pipeline gets destroyed, right? So, what do you like? I think that there's a big part in that training component, like you had mentioned, for account managers and leaders to really focus on the most important people on their front line. That's the reality. Now,
I think what's interesting too is even in that study, they show just what's obviously leadership's concerns, right? Like what is leadership what's keeping them up at night, but then also what's the field? Like what's the field staying up around? Like what are they concerned about? And they are completely different things. So the field obviously where am I going to find a candidate? Like the availability of candidates, all of these different things. And leadership just has different views of what's the stressor right now. I think that's where, you kind of have to have that bridge of the gap a little bit of, hey, we both should be concerned about this. But at the same time, the field also sometimes does need to look and see, okay, what is leadership concerned about and why is that concerning? I think something, when I kind of moved into the enterprise sales that I never really had considered at all was, excuse me, the days outstanding on an invoice. Right? So when you're talking to a client and they're saying, well, I want to pay 45 days, as a salesperson, you're like, I don't care, whatever, 4 or 5 days, woo. But as leadership is like 45 days, that's a long time that we have money out that we're paying payroll off of and we're not getting any money in. So just bridging that little of a gap of just, hey, this is why it's important. And a lot of times it's just leadership saying this is why it's important. Something else when, I came over here, I realized how much staffing firms look at obviously source tracking. Right? That's how then they determine, are we going to use CareerBuilder again? I validly say, and I have no shame in it whatsoever, I screwed up my company's source tracking like no other because I didn't realize no one used it for anything. I just, where'd you find this placement? I don't know. Today it feels like this one, and I would just pick one. Well, I then skewed so much source tracking. So it's something that minor that I feel like, when you're on a desk level, you feel like, oh, this is silly. No one needs to know it. That's now how everyone else is making a decision later down the line.
Exactly.
Keeping those things kind of up to date, it seems tedious and silly, but it is actually important. So I think
that comes down to systematizing your whole entire process, right? Like really understanding, where candidates are coming from, understanding all the details behind it. And again, coming back to the data point, data it is already big, but at the same time, I think people aren't necessarily using data in the proper way, right? So and it goes back down to all the AI like products that are coming out. It's like AI and staffing.
Yeah,
it's such a buzzword right now. We use AI. We like this. AI doesn't mean anything unless you're actually
Exactly.
using it in the proper ways, right? AI to find a candidate, honestly, there's no real need for that. I think
Right.
AI around understanding where the candidate flow is coming from and understanding how to optimize a situation, or even if you're doing video conferencing with a potential candidate, there's software and tools that will analyze facial recognition and like
Yeah.
stuff that's really deep into the AI that has actual application. But I mean,
I
just
think
to find a candidate, I don't know.
there's an aspect of that you're never going to, you can't eliminate the human aspect.
Mm,
Like you're never going to eliminate that human piece from the hiring overall ecosystem.
yeah.
Um, and so within CareerBuilder, we kind of have that hello to hire ecosystem, right?
Mm,
So all of those different pieces, whether it's, you're starting at the beginning of, hey, we need to figure out, do I need somebody? So like that workforce planning piece, all the way up to kind of, okay, now I'm going to source for the person. So I've got to post, I've got to get it to all these places.
yep.
Now there's the ATS, right? There's the whole ecosystem all the way to the end of onboarding of
Yeah.
that. Now there's a whole nother set of ecosystem of now this person works for you. So,
Mm,
payroll, performance, benefit, there's all of those other pieces. So you can go through and kind of AI different facets of it. But in all reality, if you take out a human to oversee any of that, none of
mm.
it's going to flow in a circle.
Oh no, not at all. And if
And
you,
there's
and
going to be breaks
especially if you
here
take
and
such a
there.
big portion of it, again, like I think it comes down to really focusing on what your AI is gonna do,
Yeah.
and where is it that it's going to assist the person that's using it, and not necessarily
Yes.
replace that person. So in sourcing, and personally, I don't. The only way I could see AI actually being done properly is scouring through the internet and identifying where layoffs are happening, or if there's
Yes.
any market data, any negative press on a company that it can identify based on keywords or whatever it might be, for me to find a candidate and go, oh, you should probably check out, Bird, because, and no plug against Bird or anything like that, but Bird, because they had this massive layoff and they handled it poorly. So people are probably looking like, but that is so complex that I don't see a
Right.
staffing firm being able to integrate something like that. Facebook probably could, but like Joe Schmo staffing firm with 130 people is probably not going to be able to implement that, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think one of the things too with data, and this is kind of just the overall piece of it, is you have to look at it like, how are you going to use your data? I had a client that I met with that was a very large, expensive hotel chain.
mm,
And it was funny. They had all of this data, obviously, as to what does a guest do when they get there.
mm,
Had no idea. Like they literally, and so it was kind of interesting where I was like, so you don't know if when your guest shows up, do they go and play golf the whole day? Like,
exactly.
so if you have a golf promo, that's obviously who you would want to market to because
Yeah.
they like the golf.
Yeah.
Instead, it was, no, we're just going to send the email to all of our past guests. Well, if
And that's a prime example of how to use AI
right.
properly, right?
And so it's all of those pieces of it's like, yeah, you have all of this data. And I think that's where a lot of companies are struggling right now is they have all this data, but how do you then turn it around and make it actually do something for you?
I find that interesting, especially like, and this kind of goes into our next point, which is differentiators, right?
Yep.
Back in the day, it was, hey, I've got 14 million candidates in my database, right?
Yes.
I mean, I use that line when,
Yeah, no, that's everyone did.
it's like, oh, I've got so many candidates. But how is differentiating with candidate? Like, I mean, that doesn't work as much anymore because, you're not getting the attraction from those candidates or whatever it might be. But like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the biggest thing is right now, the ATSs in general are they're built great, right? They're not built great to search because that wasn't what their intention was, right? Like their intention was to be a warehouse of here's where you put all of your candidates.
Mm,
Well, then the whole premise is like, okay, well, if the candidate applied to me 5 years ago, they're probably still interested,
yeah.
right? But you can't get back to them. So now you're having to buy an additional tool in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just kind of changed with the market. So again, I think companies that can figure out how to do that and how to redeploy, how to keep their people engaged. Obviously setting up talent networks, which we have a ton of different companies have talent networks through CareerBuilder, but just that re-engagement of that consistency of, someone's still getting an email of, hey, like I talked to you a year ago, still just sending you this job. Like, I don't know, you might be hitting that person that day something went wrong and they're like, I want to find a new job, or they're saying, oh, I'm good, I'm happy, delete. Okay, but that name is still staying fresh in their mind. So it's all around continuing their employer brand.
Mm-hmm.
And your employer brand isn't so much of the brand of, hey, I want to work here. I mean, you look at right now, right? Like Disney, right? Everyone knows who Disney is.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, oh, I love going to Disneyland. Who doesn't, right? But when you then turn that around and you say, okay, well, do you want to work at Disney? You're going to have a different reaction based off of things that have come out in the marketplace. So
for sure.
Companies spend so much money focusing on their brand as a product
instead of their brand as
on, hey, you want to work for me? You want to work at my company. So I think having that re-engagement in all of those different pieces just increases that, because nobody wants to ever hear from their friend of a friend of a friend. Like, I applied to this company, I interviewed, I never even got a feedback. I never heard from them ever again, right? That's an instantaneous negative, and you know that that friend has now told 20 people who then told, right? It just spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
And some people take it with a grain of salt. Some people are like, oh, it's fine, it was just you. Other people are like, oh my God, I would never, right? So you don't know how that's coming across. So I think all of those different pieces is where you really have to start focusing on that engagement tool. And we actually, in that state of this state, I'm going to pull this up real quick, is just around the different pieces of what different firms are having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is actually a really good piece of content, especially on the fact that I'm a big believer of social media, not just your LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
And not just, the Facebook aspect. You got to really commit to social, especially as a small staffing firm. I think it's our biggest, if you have less than 50 employees, like this says, if you're independent, you creating a brand for yourself, and not just as a company, but as each individual person working there, really growing the brand of the individual is going to be the big differentiator for, I think, 90% of staffing firms in the future. And I think that's a big one. I think a lot of large staffing firms and just in staffing firms in general focus on, what the staffing firm as a whole is doing, and not really focusing on, what each individual recruiter is doing and helping them become a better brand on that platform. So for me, that's a big differentiator.
Yeah. But, and we have a tool, it's called Social Referral. And so what it's used as is it's basically used as a tool to basically help you bring in staff. So all of your employees are given access to it, and they can post their own content, obviously through, someone approves it and all of those different pieces. But, we do here at CareerBuilder, we utilize it internally. Mm-hmm. And so we do different things of, we'll have like a hashtag challenge. So everybody, post on this different hashtag challenge for the week, post different pictures about it. And so it's bringing in that this is what our company culture is and taking it to the outside, but it's not being done through a lens of marketing. Yes. It's being done through, this is how I feel as an individual employee. Like, this is our brand. And so.
Do you ever see that going in a negative direction, or in a way where people might not be utilizing it in a way that's going to be able to really engage with the people that are coming in? Or I find it sometimes that there's this, what is an echo chamber that comes through in that way, where everybody's saying the same thing, and then it does kind of become gimmicky. What are your thoughts?
So ours is definitely, we did one, our most recent one actually. So our new logo is now Building For You. So we actually just did a whole contest where everybody could build out as teams. They could build out the Legos, right? So we were given Legos, you built it out, and then the winning team, we donated $2,020 to a charity that team had chosen. So all of those were shared across our social referral, right? And it's kind of one of those things, personally, I don't want to go build Legos. That's not my jam. But for other people, that was super fun. And I can say that when I saw the pictures go across, and this was done worldwide for us, our Chicago office won. But these things were so incredibly intricate that in my mind, I was like, are you sure this didn't come from a kit? That's what to me. But it was kind of something fun to see across the world from a culture standpoint of just different people interpreting, here's what I want to build. Our Atlanta office, focused a lot on the fact that the Olympics had been in Atlanta, right? So they had different things from that perspective. So it was really kind of cool to see it that way. Yeah. Definitely, some of the hashtag challenges, I wouldn't say we become gimmicky, because we definitely have like consistent people that use it, and then randomly there'll be somebody that uses it. We sponsored WWE. Oh gosh, wasn't Raw, it was the other one, but we sponsored one of the WWE ones. And so our Halloween party in our corporate office, our CEO dressed up as WWE stars, right? So kind of just, again, everybody embracing it. And, we had WWE stars come to the office and we're kind of walking around. So it was just a very different thing. But I feel like those are things that kind of let people in to see the culture of a company.
Yeah.
And when you're looking of, I want to change jobs, those are the things you're looking at of like, well, am I going to fit in there? Am I going to like that? And, sometimes just walking around and seeing things like, you're like, oh, that's cool. Everyone works in a cubicle. Like that's not really it's not really giving you anything into any insight at all.
Totally. So I think that one of the big things that we were talking right now about is a staffing firm or a company trying to bring in talent, right? In either regard, right? Like you're bringing in talent to your team. As a differentiator on the client or the recruiter agency or agency recruiter or someone who's trying to talk to a candidate or a client, how are they differentiating? What are you seeing on the market? And from your clients and your perspective, where's the differentiation going to start coming from today?
I think right now across the board, I think just, when someone's deciding, especially in the staffing industry, deciding to move to another staffing firm, right? There's aspects within their current firm that they do not like. And, staffing is a little bit of like, staffing is staffing, right? Like I don't want to say the grass isn't greener. It's just different grass.
Yeah.
Like things are going to be done a little bit differently. So I think if you're trying to decide if this is something you want to do and you want to move, you really need to sit down and take a good look at what are the things that you dislike. Figure out, are those things that can be different in another firm?
Yeah.
Or is this something of like, I just don't like this of the industry? Sure. There's definitely pieces that, same thing every day, right? It's going to be the exact same, metrics. You're going to have metrics no matter where you go, right? Like,
yeah, but like at the same time, it's like one of those things where clients like are just getting, if I go to another firm and I want to work with that firm, like I feel like one of the big things for me to look at is how we're approaching our clients, right? And how we're approaching our candidates and what's the real differentiator there. And for us, the reason why we even started this whole business with Atalent was we believe that that recruiting is going to be more based on content and brand and data, right? So we don't just post a job. Like that's one of our big differentiators. We just believe that like job postings are good, but they're not going to be the most effective way to get the top talent in this market. It's going to be the relationships. And we're in a really unique time right now. Like, and this goes back to the social piece where you can create a relationship with a lot of people relatively quickly without even talking to them through your social network, right? Through your social brand and through what you're posting or whatever it might be. So like, how does that one recruiter like that doesn't really have a social presence continue to differentiate? And what are the trends are you seeing like on the side of reaching out to clients? Like what can we give to a client that really is going to help them be better at recruiting talent or even a candidate?
Yeah. I think some of the things that, clients really are wanting, this is where staffing firms, I think, have kind of always left them wanting more a little bit, is that predictive hiring analytics, that figuring out like, when is my trend? Which it feels, I feel like, right, when you're sitting on the outside, you're like, how do you not know when you're busy? Like, duh, like, how would you not know that? But a lot of clients, that's not what they've been focusing on. It's a little bit of like, oh, well, that's my job, whatever. They don't ever actually sit back and look at it to see when was I the busiest. So within our actual job feed tool, so you can see, so this is just, I just pulled up Oracle, but you can kind of get an idea of, this is Oracle's insights, right? So they spend, their jobs are open for roughly 46 days.
I love this. This is so awesome.
That's just a simple question to have with them of like, okay, like, do you think that's too long? Do you think that's long enough? Right? Like everyone's going to have a different response as to this time frame. But you can also then see what is their hiring trend? Like when do they post the most, right? So
this is just based on jobs. This is not based on like new employees per month, right?
No, this is based off of their job postings that they've been putting out. You can obviously see kind of their different job boards that they post on. And then obviously what types of roles, and I did computer in mathematical initially, but you can just kind of see like, okay, software engineers is the biggest thing that they hire for.
Mhm.
But this is all of those different pieces around data. And all this is really doing is, sure, when you look at this, this isn't necessarily making you a placement. It's not making you a deal. But what it's doing is it's going to elevate that conversation that you're now having with your client around, hey, what goes on here? Why is it this way? Why did you guys do it that way? Why is it taking so long? Like all of those different pieces. I mean, I guarantee you that most companies have no idea that it takes them this long to fill a job.
Especially companies that are probably mid-market and in growth stage, right? Like they're thinking, just post the job, we'll hire 3 recruiters to jump on it, and those 3 recruiters can handle like 100 jobs over the next year. That they just don't see it. And I think this right here is so awesome.
Or it's one person that knows it, right? Like maybe the CHRO fully knows. The CHRO is in complete, like, yes, I know it takes this long. I know how much it costs. Like they have it broken down completely, but you're not talking to the CHRO, right? So your levels down in having that conversation of being able to bring that data to them.
Yeah.
And those are the things that clients want from staffing firms. Like staffing firms, again, they have all of this data. They have all this data on their clients that an end client doesn't necessarily have. So I think sometimes, and again, it's all being, how do you present that data? I mean, the same with the supply and demand data. You can't present it in such a way from a sales way. You have to make sure that you're presenting it in a, I'm sharing this with you type of thing. And sure, this is why I can't pay, your bill rate is $10. I can't pay that. Like, this is why. You're doing it to validate your own objection of what you're trying to kind of get from them. And then they can obviously utilize that same data to then go and work to try and get more compensation for you. So it's just, again, utilizing the data to help you, but you have to present it in such a way that it's being a, hey, I'm sharing this with you to help you, client, which will turn around and help you.
And this is such a big one, especially if you have target companies, right? If you're focusing on 1 or 2 companies, or sorry, like, I hope you're never focusing on just 1 or 2 companies, but like focusing on like 20 or 30 companies that you're really trying to target and really trying to get into, build those relationships with, and you're trying to mushroom an account, right? And at the end of the day, I still believe that you should niche into whatever market you're in, but that's outside perspective, right? So it's one of my favorite quotes from, I don't remember who it was, but it just stuck with me, was niche on the outside. Be very specific on the outside, which means like your social media, your brand, all that stuff can be all niche. But when you get in, that's when you can be a generalist, right? And you can actually target other opportunities within an organization. So like, this is those opportunities where if you have a target company that, say your industry is AR, VR, or security, or whatever it might be, and you're targeting these companies that are between 200 and 1,000 people, those companies are going to have different recruiting needs. And if you're absolutely following along just to get on as a vendor, and then now like, hey, I'm the security professional, and I just saw that your marketing department's hiring. Like, I've got all this data. I noticed that, on your trend, you start hiring for this season. I'm assuming that's because you have, conference season coming up, right? So, hey, let me help you out. I've already got 6 candidates that I've already sourced for this, just so you're ready, right? So, and I think that's huge. Like, then you're not just coming out with the standard, like, let's talk about this. Like, what's your thoughts on the standard MPC candidate outreach right now? Like, is it?
I think here's the thing. I think it works. I think you definitely have to craft it, and it has to be very specific. Like, you really have to kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not so much, especially right now, you can't do as much of the spray and pray approach of, I'll send the same candidate to 40 people and hope maybe someone will say they need them. Which obviously, right, like, that's one way to do it. I think right now, though, you're better off going about it of like, hey, like, I know from market intel that you guys were working on this type, you're working on a Cash App program, right? This person on a Cash App program previously, here's why I think they'd be a good fit. Like, you really have to kind of justify why you think it's a good fit.
Yeah.
I feel like staffing, so much of staffing, it's like dating, right? Like, I mean, it's such a weird thing, and to think of it in that way, but it really is of that, like, you don't go on one date and be like, we're getting married. I mean, you might, and right? There's a whole other ball of wax of that, but it's a lot from that perspective of that, like, your one phone call to a client isn't we're getting married.
Yeah.
It's, like, hey, like maybe you want to have coffee with me. I don't know. Like maybe.
I mean, exactly. Like at the end of the day, like, and I think that's on a perspective on both sides too. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to work with a client that just doesn't understand my value. Like,
Right.
that doesn't make sense for me because it's such an uphill battle just to get
Yes.
someone to hire someone. The last thing I want is all the boulders and things like that.
All of the pieces.
Right? Like I want a clear path forward because you understand and we understand that we're going to be able to work together and we're not running around a trail that's unbounded, right? And for me, that's my perspective. So my marketing is very catered to the type of company I want to work with.
Yeah. But I think so too, when you were saying just in general, how do you kind of right now start building like your own brand and start differentiating yourself? I mean, I think all over LinkedIn, you're seeing, recruiters and different people within, being able to have that access saying, hey, like send me your resume, I'll look it over, like just anything. And it's not, and I think that's also like the piece of that networking aspect of, you will find that a lot more people are more apt to help you if you kind of target them a little bit. I'm sending an email to somebody that works at a Microsoft or an Amazon saying like, hey, is there anything that looks good for me? Like, okay. Like when you're an employee in that large of an organization, you don't even know what looks good to you, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I got nothing for you. And it's not that they don't want to help, but it's just a little bit more of that target of, hey, and I have numerous friends, for instance, recruiters at Amazon. I know all of them have posted, hey, reach out to me, I'll look over your resume, right? Like everyone's going to do the best that they possibly can. So I think it's reaching out for things like that. Probably 6 months ago or so, I saw somebody, and I think a lot of people ended up seeing his post, but it was on LinkedIn of this person had just posted like, hey, here's what I've been trying to do. Everything. It was this whole long thing. And I literally was so touched by it. It was so incredibly vulnerable, but just straightforward of like, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. Here's what I'm willing to do. Right. Like he broke it down that I reached out to him and I was like, bro, what do you need? Like, let's figure it out.
And that goes back, and that's right there is that's the same thing that recruiters and salespeople in general often forget, right? Like clients are still people, right? So if you give a perspective, you're vulnerable, you're authentic, and you're real about what you're trying to accomplish, you will get, again, the right people versus versus like all the people. I'd rather get right people and not waste my time with all the people any day. And I think that's what kind of comes down to with like a lot of the spray and pray NPC model where, and hear me out, like, cause I used to be a big violator of this specific principle because
we all have.
When I was back in big agency, it was like, I've got a 5-year experience, 7-year experience candidate with Java. You want to see him? And then at the time it
hit me up, yeah.
Yeah, because it worked. It worked so well because social media and LinkedIn, emails, and recruiting in general hadn't got to that point of saturation that it didn't matter. Like executive probably hadn't been burned by a recruiter just yet, right?
Exactly.
They're just learning any of this stuff. Oh yeah, send them over, right? It was really easy. Yeah, send them over. Now, every single time I can count it on, like, every time, probably almost, I won't say everything, 80 to 90% of the time, when I get that email responded back to with a positive, yes, send them my way, the client is always the hardest client to work with because you're competing against 20 or 30 different other recruiting firms that they forgot they even have. And then especially now when it's like markets down, all those companies are literally going back to their list of companies that signed agreements or they've had a positive conversation with, and then reaching back out to them. So now you're just like another recruiter in their system. And and I know this, if you have a good recruiter on a team, specifically on a department, you only need 1 or 2, right? Depending on your needs. If you have like massive needs all across the country, then you're probably gonna need more. But most companies don't need more than 1 or 2 recruiters that are good. That's the reality.
I think it's more around the aspect of, I think a lot of companies typically will go and they'll have lots of vendors, right? And they're creating that supply and demand, and they're creating that competition amongst them of like, well, how can I get better rates and all of these different pieces. But yes, when you start looking at it down into the nitty gritty, you're like, having 30 firms on your list isn't going to help help you find any more candidates because there's still only a certain amount of candidates in like,
Yes.
so it's not that suddenly, oh, I have 30 firms, so they're going to find all these extra people. It's like, there's still a finite amount of people to be found. And so sure, maybe will they each maybe find one individual that no one else found? Possibly, but in the long run, you really are just kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of looking at it like you're not getting anything extra. And I think a big thing too that companies have realized now is that, you know, a lot of staffing firms, when they're like, I don't want to be one of the 30. So they're like, peace out. I just won't work with you.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't pay attention. If I talk to a candidate and they've been approached by 5 different recruiters, I'm immediately like, yeah, it's just not worth it for me.
It depends back to the dating thing, right? Of that, like, if you go on a date with someone and you're like, wait, you're going on a date every single night with someone else, you're like, no, dude, I don't need to be one in a million. Like, I kind of want to be the one. Like,
So
I make for 3, I'm cool, but like, as things progress, like, I then eventually want to be one. But for the most part, no one from a human nature standpoint wants to be like a drop in the bucket.
exactly. So and this kind of goes back to how do you differentiate amongst that, right? Like I love your tech. So I'm going to be a customer very soon.
Yeah.
We're signing up contracts right now, right? So like at the end of the day, I love the tech that you provide, and like it comes back down to how do you differentiate if you have a client that goes, we need 100, we have 4 or 5 different recruiting firms. How do you get out of that sect of, or that pool of recruiters that basically get ignored, right? And
I
how do
think
you turn yourself into an actual partner in your perspective? Because you've been doing this.
Sorry, wait, I have like a visitor that really wants to join the call.
Oh yeah.
I think it's more around figuring out where can you add value that someone else can't. So this kind of goes back into when I was doing more enterprise side, was figuring out of like, okay, so hey, you guys have this office in, we'll just say Fargo, North Dakota, right? Like no one else has an office there. So can I just be your exclusive then for that location?
Yes.
Right. So really kind of understanding where are their gaps, because everyone's going to have a gap, right? It might be on a skill set. It might say, hey, you know what? I cannot find security engineers, like just period. We can't find them. Okay. And if you know that that's something you can do and you can fulfill that gap, then you can ask for that. Like you can ask for that exclusivity. You can ask for a higher markup. Like you can ask to have that.
Oh yeah.
Make sure that whatever it is, that's that gap, that you can actually fulfill that gap.
Yeah. And that you know who really does a really good job? This is a shout out to my boys over at Stop and May. Those guys crush it on that regard, and specifically on security. Like,
yeah,
they just know the market. And I've thought about jumping into security, but again, I'm not a big believer in jumping into a bunch of different industries. I'd rather wait this out, you know, take the hit, bruise up a little bit, heal up, and then be stronger, right? But for them, they have been crushing the security market. And I literally, as a recruiter, I refer my clients to them. I go, I don't know about this. Here you go. Go talk to them.
And I think that transparency to clients means more now of, you know, validly saying like, hey, I am not the right person for that. Like, and like, that's for me, I mean, kind of how I've always kind of built my career, is just validly telling people and being honest and transparent. I mean, I remember my very first job order I ever took, that was a security role, and it was for a penetration tester. And I had no clue, like at all, to the point that I just sat in that meeting, I wrote everything down, and I went back and I Googled like my heart out, because I was, so I mean, I didn't ask any questions. I didn't know anything to ask any questions, like, you know, but it was taking that and knowing I know nothing, and I could just run with it and giving it to my recruiters and said, here, you guys figure it out. And instead I was like, no, like I can't do
You're not adding any value that way. Like,
right. And then, you know, then once I knew what I was talking about, I then went back to the client and I told him, I said, look, I said, I had no idea what you were talking about in that entire meeting, but I now do. And now I got some questions, right? And I think just having that candidness of, I wasn't going to stop your whole meeting to say I have no clue what we're doing. Like, I'm not going to do that, but I will come back later in a non-group format and kind of lay that out of like, hey, here's where I was. Here's what I did to figure it out, but now I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, totally. So
I think in recruiting in general, that transparency, that honesty, all of that rings true. And I think within staffing, you have to look at it of that. It really is, it's a long game, right?
100%.
Like, it's an industry you can make a lot of money, you can do well, but it's a long game, and it's really more about kind of carrying through and helping people, you know, obviously you're helping getting food on your own table, but you know, you want to kind of continue that on and helping somebody else. And I think right now, you know, I started in the market in '03 when obviously there were a ton of candidates and very few jobs. Um, and so, I mean, I kind of was lucky enough to come into the market in that and really get that aspect of me getting somebody a job, how that actually changed their life and their family.
Yeah.
And that meant so much to me that, I mean, I feel like we're going to go back through that right now. And that's really where you're going to see some recruiters really start to stand out and really kind of get back to the aspect of what recruiting really is. And that is you're helping make somebody else's life better.
Yeah.
So
There's a value to that, right? There,
yeah,
and at the end of the day, it's like, wow, well, why do people pay us such big dollars? There's a value in
right,
what we do, right? Either I could start charging the candidate for the service that we provided, or we could
right.
just start charging you. One of the two, like either way, it is what it is. And a good recruiter is worth their weight in gold by far. You know, it's just, and I'm a big boy, so like that's 260 pounds of gold, you know, so
Yeah.
like you got to just make sure that you're actually becoming somebody that's an advisor and ensuring that you're taking out, you know, taking yourself out of the process, not just
Right.
trying to close a deal. And it's just one of the most frustrating parts about what recruiting kind of has become, because it's been
Yes.
so transactional lately. And I really do think with the data you guys provide and with like the new technology that's coming out, the future recruiting is going to be bright for those who actually know how to use it, and in a way
Yeah.
that's not um, predatorial, where they're just trying to get the transaction done, get anybody they can in the role.
Yes.
Just what, like the real recruiters will be just enhanced, and the recruiters that are going to be fly by night, just trying to get those deals in and pushing their teams to get like, I think that's going to be gone. I think, or not
Yeah.
gone, but it'll still be there, but it just won't be. You're going to get those people are going to get the lower barrel type of roles versus like the high quality and high proficiency types of positions. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things too with like the supply and demand tool, it's always been so much of a focus on the sales side, right? Of like use it to share with clients. There is an aspect, especially within the compensation piece, that recruiters can use to kind of help candidates figure out based off of their years of experience, their education, all of those things as to where should they be from a compensation standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I feel like typically, you know, you always have that candidate that for whatever reason, you know, just based off of where they're working, all these things is really underpaid, or you have that candidate that's extremely overpaid.
Yeah.
And trying to level set them and give them that feedback. And, you know, I mean, for anybody, right? Like everyone lives to what they're making, right? So to tell somebody you need to take less money, but to give them that idea of, hey, this is where everybody else that kind of, you know, has your education level, has your years of experience, this is how much they're making. So you making $10 more an hour is unrealistic.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so there's definitely
You should
other
probably just stay where you are if that's like the biggest portion of what you're trying to find.
right. And so, and it's not, and I feel like, again, it's as a recruiter and as the staffing industry, you have that data that candidates don't have. So it's like you're sharing that with them and being that advisor and giving them all of those data points so that they can obviously sit down and make that decision themselves.
Yeah.
You know, because again, you don't have their life. Like you don't know kind of what's going on as to why do they want to move, all of those different pieces. And I think that's the other piece as well is really, you know, especially right now, looking at resumes and everyone's gonna have to adjust to
Yeah.
realize like, oh, you know, this person was a job hopper, or they were out of work, all of those things, like all of that needs to go out the window and people need to start looking at around can you do the job? Like, are you gonna fulfill the job and kind of move it forward from there?
So that actually leads into my next question for you, and
Yeah,
I think we're about to run over time, but at the end of the day,
yeah, we're good.
I want to be respectful for your time and the audience's time as well. But you know, where do you really see the future of recruiting going? Where is this happening?
Oof.
What's some of the trends that's happening?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is, I think it's really going to focus. I mean, IT in general, obviously 2021, SIA is projecting that obviously it'll go back up, right? It's not going to go back up to 2019, but it is going to go back up. And then it will kind of follow suit by 22, kind of going up even further. So I think IT staffing is definitely just going to continue to grow. I think though, as a recruiter, and I think just all of this in all companies, I think this has entire experience of the quarantine has really humanized people and
Yes.
to really understand that obviously people are juggling multiple things, you know, family, life, kids, just all of it, right? Like there's more aspect of you are human first and then an employee, right? And like all those different pieces. So I think if anything, I think it's going to start bringing in more of that feel goodness, I guess you want to say, back into recruiting. I think, we're just really going to have to rely on clients and companies to kind of go through that experience as well, and figure out just in general of, okay, well, if someone wasn't working, well, why weren't they working? And, instead of just tossing that resume to the side of figuring out, okay, what happened here?
Mhm.
We're going to be getting a lot of resumes that it is going to be that, March 2020,
Yep.
not working. And I don't think valuing a candidate on the, oh, well, they went back to work right away in June, like they're great, versus someone that didn't go back to work in December. Like, there's so many other aspects that could have been going on in that time frame that you just don't know about to
Yep.
just discount that person.
And you're seeing it across literally almost every platform. There's more engagement, specifically on LinkedIn, right? There's been more engagement than ever before. I'm seeing posts get 30,000, 40,000 likes
Yes.
and 3,000 comments. That never happened on LinkedIn. Like I've been on the LinkedIn game for a very long time. It rarely happens. And the fact that these people are the really common factor is the humanization of it. And everyone who's doing it is talking about that aspect. And I think this is going to go towards recruiting, sales, hire, whatever it is as a leader. Thought leadership is going to not just be this polished look anymore. It's going to be about really actually who's on the ground floor, who's really understanding what it's all about versus just kind of, going through the motions, posting a job and expecting emails to come or candidates to come in. Like, that's not going to work anymore. Like there's a post by Brendan Rogers, shout out to Brendan, because he posted a very simple post, and it was, dear companies, please take down any of the positions that you're not hiring for that have been paused, filled just to get resumes. Thanks everyone. And that post has gotten an astounding amount of attention.
Yes.
I immediately posted or tagged Indeed, LinkedIn Recruiter, and all of them just to say, look, this is what the candidates are saying. Nobody wants you to automatically post a position.
Right.
If you have a position open and you're not interviewing, just take it down. Like,
right, it's not that hard. Yeah,
it's not that hard. And then one recruiter, I kind of reposted it in my own way for the candidate to say, if you want to avoid this, this is what you do. And one of the recruiters that jumped on asked, well, what's your thoughts on a client that's put a position on hold? Do you still advertise it because they're going to need the candidate in the future?
It's going to come back, right? Yeah.
And I said, you can just be very transparent in the subject line, position on hold, and say, we're still accepting resumes because the client's going to come back in the future. Like that's literally all I have to say. So now the candidate can choose, hey,
what they want to do.
Do I want to be subjected to like putting my resume in for this reason? And I just can't get behind ghost posts. I've never been able to do it.
Yeah.
Can't get behind ghost posting. Can't get behind ghost resume writing or ghost candidates. Like those things just ruin everything, the experience on both ends. And I'm a strong recruiter, but again, I'm more about fit than anything. So at the end of the day, I don't want to like be struggling to get a candidate.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I think transparency with everything, right? It's just like being transparent. Like, hey, like we're not getting interviewed for this right now. We're putting it on hold. All those different pieces. And I mean, even overall, we've seen just a 60% increase in traffic of just our applications.
Yeah.
Over the past 2 weeks. And so a lot of that though too is, and this is where, again, taking that step back as a recruiter, right? If someone is applying for a job that they are overqualified, right? Where you're like, no, you would never be applying for this job in any other time frame. Still give that person a call, because you know what? Like, again, you don't know what's going on in your situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a friend that she was in staffing. She got laid off, and she even told me flat out, she was like, at this point, I would take a call center job. And she was like, not necessarily for the financial aspect, but she's like, I'm bored, right? And that's what I mean. And like, again, it's not necessarily like, she's not saying it of like, hey, I want to take this call center job because that's what I want to change my career to. But she's saying it of like, hey, this would fill this for me at this point in time. And that's what I think people have to take that big realization and realize is that a job fulfills different aspects for different people.
Yep.
For some people, that is how they live. For other people, that's not, they just really enjoy it, right? There's all these different facets of it. And so I think kind of eliminating people because, oh, you know, you don't have enough years of experience, or you have too much years of experience, or you like all of those different pieces, you know. I love the quote from Apollo 13 of like, stop looking at what something was built to do and look at what it can do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, obviously it was in reference to a thing, right? But it's the same thing with people of like, what can they do? You know, you look at all of the different companies that have switched their manufacturing to make PPE and all of these different things. You know, I think it's Anheuser-Busch is now making hand sanitizer. Like, we're not meant to make hand sanitizer. That's not like, it's not at all what they've set up themselves to do. But again, like, we can all start to retool and figure out what other skill do I have that can actually do this instead. You know, like the biggest number one type of candidate that we're seeing coming to CareerBuilder right now is bartenders, right? Like, you think in your head, well, bartender, you just make a drink. There's a lot of multitasking that goes on with that. There's a lot more things that they're doing in it as a job skill that I think people just discount it as to what they really do. But you're like, what else can they go do?
Yeah.
So just kind of taking that back seat a little bit and thinking a little bit more through it versus the simple click, 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 click. Oh yeah, they look good. I'm going to call them. They're bad. I'm not talking to them.
Totally. And that's definitely a good piece of advice for any hiring manager right now that's looking at, you know, candidates to bring on board. It's like, if you're in a growth stage situation, really start to look at these candidates as people who can do other things, because you might have to train them a bit, but that person's going to be so loyal to you in the end because you stuck with them in the middle of a downturn, you know, like, and you helped them out. And you didn't make them feel like they were lucky to get a job or whatever it might be, right? It's just looking at them as humans. So that's a really good point.
I had a past client too. It was interesting. They went through and they found that they wanted to switch and they wanted to do a whole project in Ruby. And so they were like, we don't have anyone on our team that knows it, right? They validly said they didn't. And so we actually instituted kind of a test, right? Of, you know, what other skills does this person need? And so in that, there were a couple of Ruby questions. They then ran it through their entire team and found that they had 3 people on their team who were basically teaching themselves Ruby at home. But no one knew that. Right. So again, it turned into, as a manager, they didn't know what they had on their team. You know,
looking internally for that aspect too. Yeah, absolutely.
It's that other piece of it, of that, like, look internally. Like, there may be skills that people have on your teams that you don't even know they have because they're talking about it. Right. They're just, you know, they were kind of interested. They started doing it on their own, all of those different pieces to kind of bring that in. And, you know, it kind of all applies back to then even when you're hiring like a new grad. Like,
and especially agency, like, and then going back into the recruiting industry as a whole, like if you're an agency and you have all these candidates or all these people that are on your team, and you know, most recruiting agencies are 90%, 99% staffing. Like they're all staffing, product producing, you know, revenue producing employees, right? So you don't necessarily have to, you got to look internally and see if, instead of firing those people because they're sales reps, right? You don't need them anymore. Look at what else you could do. That was one of my biggest problems with big agencies, is they're not looking at what else can these people add value to our system and how could they? And it's just like, oh, you didn't produce. You're not a producer. You know,
some of the best operations people I ever worked with were producers at one point. Because again, like, in order to kind of build those back end operations, if you understand how a producer is working, how they're thinking, all of those things, you can build your operations around the producers, which then they like that, right? Like, they're going to produce more, they're going to do all these things. So there's just a lot of different pieces, but I think that's a whole of take that good look at your team and take a good look at your candidates and see what other things are they capable of doing, or even if they're interested in. You know, because sometimes, you know, I tell all my nieces and nephews when they're picking their major for college, I'm like, pick what you're interested in, because that's what's going to get you up and get you to class every day. It's not going to be well, I want to do this as a job. Like, pick what you're interested in, because someone that's interested in something, they're going to do way more than somebody who is like, oh, whatever, you're just paying me to do it.
Don't be a doctor just to make the check. So
no, actually, you want to help people.
Especially, exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time, Erin. I really appreciate it. I know my audience really appreciates it. So
of course,
if people wanted to get a hold of you, either as a staffing agency or for advice or whatever it would be, how would they do so?
You can just send me an email. It's erin.varnado@careerbuilder.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well as Erin Varnado. So you can always LinkedIn me. Again, if anyone wants help on their resume or just anything, please feel free to ping me. I definitely here to help. I think the staffing industry is a great industry. It's really difficult to navigate just because it is so big and there's so many different nuances. But it is kind of one of those that if you like the industry, stick with it and just figure out what are the things you don't like. And that could probably be more about your company more than anything. So,
yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for your time.
of
And
course,
we're out, guys. Have a great day.
have a good day.